Welcome to Village Church Connections. I'm David Pavey. Some time ago, I received a letter from an American friend of mine who was living in Cluj, Romania. In it, he recounted the following anecdote. I was sitting at a table eating my meal when I noticed a boy of 12 or 14 come into the cafeteria. The worn-out blue sweatsuit was clearly lived in full time, advertising that he was living on the streets. Now, this cafeteria is nothing special, but it's quick and pretty clean, and for less than $3 you can have a decent meal. I watched as the boy walked up to the serving line and looked at the food through the glass counter. 1 minute he had a slight smile, and the next a look of disappointment as he realized there wasn't enough money in his pocket to buy a meal. Turning away from the counter, he went over to the table closest to the serving line. I fully expected him to beg for money from the couple that was sitting there, but was surprised to hear him ask if they were finished with their plates. When they said yes, an amazing smile spread across the boy's face, a Christmas morning kind of smile. By this time, I was totally engrossed, and I watched as he carefully stacked the dishes onto the tray and removed it from the table. He must be taking it back to the kitchen to earn some food in exchange, I thought to myself. But he didn't go to the kitchen. Instead, he took the tray to a table, sorted out the dirty silverware, and unfolded the used napkin. And then, with the smile of an angel on his face, he folded his hands and quietly gave thanks to God for the remains of someone else's lunch. I suddenly seemed to have trouble seeing clearly. As I left my tray behind to walk out of the cafeteria, I paused to hand the boy a small gift. Now, he couldn't have known my nationality, but he looked at me and said, "Thank you." Seeing that smile on his face as he thanked God for a tray of scraps is something I hope I'll never forget. Well, that's the story. But it challenged me to check my own attitude towards the poor and needy. It reminds me of God's warning to Jerusalem via the prophet Ezekiel. Now, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were arrogant. In E.M. Forster's novel Howard's End, the hero, Henry Wilcox, exclaims, "Well, the poor are poor and one is sorry for them, but there it is." Arrogant. They were overfed. Put a knife to your throat if you are given to gluttony, warns the Bible. In other words, don't stuff yourself. They were overfed. And they were unconcerned. They lacked compassion. They didn't care. They did not help the poor and needy. The story is told of some soldiers serving in France during the Second World War who wanted to bury a fellow soldier who had been killed. They found a well-kept cemetery adjacent to a Catholic church, which was the perfect place to bury their friend with dignity. But the priest informed them that unless their friend was a baptized Catholic, he could not be buried there. And he wasn't a baptized Catholic. Sensing the soldiers' disappointment, the priest showed them a spot just outside the cemetery where they could bury their friend. And reluctantly, they did so. The next day, the soldiers returned to pay their final respects to their fallen friend, but they couldn't find the grave. "Surely we can't be mistaken. It was right here," they said. Confused, they approached the priest, who took them to a spot inside the cemetery boundary. "Last night I couldn't sleep," said the priest. "I was troubled that your friend had to be buried outside the cemetery, so I got up and I moved the fence." Perhaps he's calling you and me to move our fence, to include more of those in need. God has a special place in his heart for your neighbor, the poor and needy, the widow, the orphan, the alien, and the little boy in Cluj. The Apostle John asked a powerful question. If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need, but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? The Apostle James asked the same question a different way. Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye and have a good day, stay warm and eat well," but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? So let's not get stuck in our comfort zone. Let's do what we can to help the poor and the needy. And thank you for tuning in once again to Village Church Connections.